Welcome back to Mastering Change. When we talk about mental health, we often forget one major ingredient: sugar. In this episode, I'm joined by neuroscientist Sophie Hascher, a researcher exploring the connection between sugar addiction and emotional well-being. We talk about how high sugar intake relates to anxiety, depression, and stress, and why reconnecting to the body is key to healing. It's a powerful reminder that mental health isn't just in the mind, it's in the whole system and body. Let's get started. Sophie Hascher, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Emma, for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Sophie. As most of our listeners will know, we start every podcast with a little card game. So I've selected a bunch of cards here. I have no idea what's on each card. All I do know is that there will be a prompt which will help you lead into some form of story. And the idea is that it's a bit of an icebreaker, that it will help you connect to us and connect to our audience so that we get to know you a little bit better before we go into the full podcast. So I will read the top card, which says, something people often misunderstand about me.
Oh, okay. I really like the question. I think a lot of people misunderstand really what I'm trying to work towards to. I think especially when people meet me for the first time, they see like someone very well dressed, very put together, and might not see like the whole depth and all the ideas that I have actually in terms of creating mental wellness and also making it such an important topic in my own life, but also wanting to share it with the outside world, like currently working towards a PhD in food addiction and sugar addiction, but also the work that I'm doing with neurofeedback to really actually help people understand mental wellness, but also to increase their mental wellness in their own life.
Great. Thank you. So everything that we do is in pursuit of new knowledge or understanding, tools and modalities in the context of trauma, mental health and well-being. Help us understand how you relate to that with the work that you do, what it is that you wish our audience knew or understood, or what you'd like them to think about in the context of their work, their clients, their profession.
Yeah, so for me, mental wellness is something incredibly important. I have witnessed actually in my own life when I was growing up that some family members struggled quite a lot. So actually I grew up in a way that I had to become strong very, very quickly and also help my family mentally to be strong and to help them, navigate life. So it has always been a very, very important topic. And something that is very, very important to me is to actually see the person as a whole. So not just in terms of like, okay, you have been diagnosed with depression, with ADHD, but there's so much more behind you, and the ADHD might also be an asset that you have. You might think differently than someone else, but it's something so valuable. And when we think about mental health in general, it's not just like the head space, I would say, but like the whole body in general. So I have worked a lot with resorts in Asia and hotels, and I've really witnessed how Asia has like such a different mindset than what we have. To really understand this connection between the mind, the brain, but also the body as a whole. And this is something that is incredibly important for me to really have the different modalities that really helps the person as a 360 degree, and not just be like, okay, this is the pill that you need and everything is going to be fixed. Like the pill will be a pillar, but there's so many other aspects that we need to look at. So whether, for instance, when we think about addiction, like there's different components or different triggers, or even like there's a why behind of why you engaging in that addiction. So a lot of the times you can actually see that people want to escape negative emotions or to feel better, and this is why they're engaging in that behavior. So when we think about addiction, we need to like see at all the different components. Okay, let's say you are anxious and this is why you're doing the addiction. You can already see there's like two very core ideas that come into play. So you can't just treat one, but you would need to treat the anxiety as well. And it's something that I'm very passionate to to really look at, okay, what treatment methods can we actually give people to not only treat one thing, but also the comorbidities between the addiction and the other mental health facets that we have.
You remind me when you say that about Gabor's Mate's ask not why the addiction, but why the pain. From what you're describing, sort of understanding that whilst you're trying to acknowledge that addictive pattern and behavior, you're trying to look for the kind of root cause when you talk about integrity.
Definitely. So this is, I love that because I feel like really the root cause needs to be looked at. Like there's so many, in a way, health challenges, whether it's mental health or health in general. Let's take endometriosis. I really do believe that endometriosis is not just about, pain management, but is also why do we have endometriosis? What is actually the almost like root cause? Is it maybe like trauma? And then the endometriosis is just like a side effect. And same as like anxiety and addiction, like it might just be a side effect of something else that is happening. So really understanding what is happening and then treating that root cause is almost like a domino effect, where then the other challenges that you have, whether it's like anxiety or the sleep or the endometriosis, will be treated because the root cause has been diagnosed in a way and treated effectively.
So talk to us a little bit about then your work in food addiction and how that's led you to be commentating specifically on sugar addiction.
Yes, I'm very interested in everything sugar addiction. So I've actually seen that there's not much research that has been done on sugar addiction. So the very little research that has been done was on animal studies, and that makes it quite complicated for us to actually do a transfer to humans, because an animal like a rat is not 100% the same as a human. So it makes it a bit challenging to really understand, okay, one, what is sugar addiction? Because there's no clear definition. Is it the pure sugar itself? So is someone addicted to sugar just because they take sugar as a pure form, or is it maybe like the ratio between fat and sugar that makes it so addictive? So when we think about biscuit factories or eating biscuits, or someone being quote unquote sugar addicted, we can see those neuroscientists behind the scenes sometimes work with the food companies to really have the sweet spot for people to buy more and to consume more. So that's also something very, very interesting that I find. But my research is all about is finding a measure to measure sugar addiction. So what I have done is to look at the substance abuse model component of addiction by Griffiths, and he has some main components that actually that tell you what an addiction looks like. And based on that model, you can see like, okay, some addictions have similarities. Let's say there's a lot of salience happening, so that person will be more and more increased to think about that addiction and to also consume, let's say, the food or gravitate towards alcohol. And then we can see, okay, is that also something that is happening potentially in sugar addiction, if sugar addiction is actually a separate component to food addiction? And very similar to mood modification, like what is happening in someone's personal mood? Like, are they engaging in that addiction to feel a high, to release stress? And based on all those components, I was able to create a sugar addiction scale to really measure it. But what was also very interesting is that I was able to see, okay, people who are higher on the sugar addictive scale also have other mental health issues. For instance, stress, anxiety, and depression is quite high, so highly correlated to sugar addiction, but very similar with ADHD. So someone having higher levels of sugar addiction also has higher levels of ADHD.
So just to wind back a little bit, do you think have you just determined there is a difference between food addiction and sugar addiction?
This is exactly what I'm trying to do. So because there's not much research, I can't give you a straight answer. I need to do a lot more research to give you a straight answer. In my opinion, there is, because I also had people reaching out to me and be like, okay, I'm actually struggling with sugar itself. I know I gravitate towards cakes, towards biscuits, and not more towards like the salty food like fatty burgers or pizza. But I can't give you a clear answer at the moment.
I think that's really fascinating, because food addiction, I've seen, understand, like, it's to do with, I think as well, to do with the feeling of fullness that, like, does whether it's dopamine, I don't know which hormone it is, but the actual, I know lots of kind of, slim people who are constantly, it's a sugary, it's a Coca-Cola, it's a tea with 3 sugars, it's a biscuit at lunch. It's like, it's the sugar particularly that is, I mean, again, it's kind of like anecdotal, but I do see there are some distinct differences between the patterns and behaviors around food addiction general, which often, like with sugar addiction, which doesn't, and I think is also like hiding in plain sight. I think there's probably a lot of people that are sugar addicted that don't recognize that.
I
It's
want to
just,
know, I'd like a more biochemical answer to what happens in the brain when you are addicted to food and eat a lot of food, and what happens to the brain specifically when you eat sugar. I want to know those two different things if you've got that answer.
So in terms of sugar addiction, I can only give you the animal models.
Okay.
So in animal models, you can see that the mesolimbic system and the dopamine reward pathway is basically differs. So it's completely hijacked and is not in a normal baseline.
When you
eat
sugar. So
yeah,
sugar.
exactly. When you eat sugar. So you can see that the prefrontal cortex, which is a lot of times associated to like the, thinking part of the brain and inhibitory control, is lowered. So that means that the person, or like the rats in that instance, because it has been done on animal research, have this almost intense feeling of craving and wanting to go more towards that sugar.
So get rid of the choice. So the choice is almost, because the prefrontal cortex is offline, the choice is taken away, and it's like, I need this. Like how I understand addiction in general is that the prefrontal cortex switches off. The limbic system part of the brain turns on and says, I need that to survive.
Exactly, yes. And you have also seen that they have done some research on animal models where it's a very similar system to cocaine. So the rats on sugar show very similar neural pathways to rats on cocaine.
Okay, and what do we have studies on food addiction then, general, total?
Yes. So food addiction, there's also the dopamine system that is definitely modified in a way, but also the opioid system and the cannabis system in the brain. So this is basically, you can see that there's a delayed increase in dopamine that happens after a peak of glucose and insulin levels. So again, it's very similar to what we have seen in the rat model with sugar addiction, where the dopamine system will be different and more hijacked in a way, and the prefrontal cortex lowered, where the inhibitory control is not that present, and where people have this urge of like, okay, I need a specific food, because that's how they basically train the brain to operate in.
It's really interesting. I think you're talking to two people who both suffered from food addiction in various forms over their lives. So I think for me, I find I've also suffered from cocaine addiction. So I understand the correlation between sugar but although I would say that when I was binge eating, my binging was definitely not sugar based only. I would say it was everything and anything, not probably vegetables, but could have been if that was all I had. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would have been anything.
That's why I was really interested in drawing the distinction between a food addiction and a sugar addiction, because my experience is also like Araminta's. It would have been whatever that would give you that feeling of full, that would do the thing. It wasn't anything sweet. Do you know what I mean? Whatever. I mean, your preference might have been for that kind of high fat, high sugar, high salt food that has been designed for us to kind of, want and crave and want more of. But it's a difference between, I have observed, friends that then don't have because the problem with food addiction is a physical manifestation. Do you know what I mean? Like I was 20 plus stone at 16 years old, thanks to a food addiction. But I knew plenty of children in the same cohort with a visible addiction to sugar, invisible in so much as it didn't manifest in like huge weight gain, but absolutely had the same function in kind of like impairing brain function and ability to then it's the consequences as well of those addictions. And I think, you know, we are becoming more aware of the consequence of what we eat in how we probably look and then feel. Still think people are obsessed with the physical appearance over the intrinsic motivation to eat well, to feel good. In fact, I just did a blog post on that only recently, you know. But I think the education around this and the change, the systemic change that's needed to put us in an environment that is more conducive to wellness through diet. I mean, I'm just on the back of month 7 of a ketogenic diet, and it's so good for my body, for my mental health, to really control. Even though having done Zoe at the start of last year, I can see I have a good response to sugar now, probably because trained over years of understanding sugar. I still think that you don't really understand the impact of sugar on your physical or mental health until you remove it for a period of time and see how game-changing it is.
No, 100%. Like, I know myself, I have a sweet tooth. Maybe it's also because I'm French, so I love all my pastries and etc. But I know that when I remove the sugar, like my brain fog is gone. And when I eat sugar, I don't even realize I have brain fog. But then also the anxiety lowers, and I feel like it's just really mind-blowing what your body, whether it's on a physical term or even like mental clarity wise, how it differs when you just like either cut it out or like reduce it. Like it's just really, really crazy.
And I think it's interesting that we're getting more people. I'm not sure I'm totally subscribing to the ethos, having watched the program this week, but people like the Glucose Goddess, that's kind of trying to educate people around slowing the release of sugar into the blood so that it has a less addictive pattern on the body's chemistry, you know, like and some of the emerging research like on foods like dates, that because of their high fiber content, how helpful they are to, you know, so there is so much happening. But I am really glad to see that there is research. I'm shocked that there isn't a stronger body of work already on sugar addiction in the human population. That just knowing that says everything you need to know about the suppression, probably by, you know, lots of organizations of research in this field, because it's not going to be positive or constructive to much of the food supply chain as it stands today. So I celebrate your work for that reason, because I don't think that we have enough education, which is the start point for change. You know, I was fortunate to be when I was 16, fortunate to have the access to education and to be able to do my own research and find my own way out of that through, at that time, it was Atkins, you know, whatever people think about it, it was the absolute tipping point for my life. But, you know, it's still peripheral. It's still many people try to debunk that way of eating, calling it very restrictive. But the model that's currently in play from the National Health System, the traffic light system on foods, is just, you know, I was a product of the 80s where they stripped the fat out of food, they filled it with sugar and artificial rubbish, and the consequences all around us. So I'm fascinated to see where your work goes. Where are you in that? Where are you in your doctorate? Where are you in your research?
Yeah, so thank you, by the way, so much for both of you to also have open up about the food addiction that you experienced. I'm also very curious to actually learn more in terms of what made you gravitate towards food, whether it was like an emotional void or emotional negative emotion that you were trying to to escape from. So yeah, I would love to hear more about this. In terms of the research, where I'm currently at is I validated the sugar addiction scale, which is exciting. So this will be soon published and put out there, so then other people can actually try to measure sugar addiction. And I also developed a virtual reality intervention where I want to use mindfulness. So people will do mindfulness either in a virtual reality environment or in a 2D environment, and we'll be doing the body scan. And I'm very curious to see whether food addiction and sugar addiction symptoms will be lowered after this intervention. So this is very exciting. And I also want to see, okay, will populations differ? So the data collection will happen in the UK and in Australia. So I want to see whether there's a population, whether the population sample differs between both countries.
It's really interesting because I think having that ability to kind of benchmark where someone is and then look at progress and interventions like mindfulness. I mean, I found hypnotherapy incredibly helpful just to work on the relationship with food. I mean, I'm happy to share that I think my addiction, I think if I'm really honest, I was as a child in the 80s, a product of that convenience food starting, and my genetic system predisposed me to weight gain in that high carbohydrate, lower protein, high sugar environment. And I think as soon as I was labeled as with a weight problem as a child, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the more isolated from your peer group that you become, the more conducive that is to weight gain. You don't move as much, you don't engage in much in social activity. Food becomes your friend and your ally, and that for me was where the pattern began, and it took a while to break. But I do think that I was interested. I'd done my master's in business context, but I'd actually spoken to in Leeds as a Professor Paul, because I'm really interested in what I think the underlying cause of the food addiction is a big part of the answer as to what tools you need to equip yourself to get out of it. I think the one size model that's been adopted is never, I was put on diet after my parents couldn't have been more supportive and tried to do. I had underlying polycystic ovary syndrome as well, which eventually, when then diagnosed, that was also, humans are so complicated. You can't look at you need to look at a root cause analysis. And this kind of understanding what gets you to the addiction, I think, is missing in our current system. We just go, oh, well, you're presenting with a food addiction or you're presenting as obese. This is the pathway, rather than going, well, what's the driver of that? So, yeah, I've waffled there a little bit, but yeah, Mint, I don't know if you want to share why you think your addiction came from.
I mean, I oscillated between kind of severe restriction and binge eating from about the age of 11, 12, I think. I was sent to Weight Watchers at the age of 12, and that was a horrifying experience for me. But again, that whole Weight Watchers mentality was kind of high sugar, really. Because Haribo, for example, on Weight Watchers would be like, I don't know, 1 point, I can't remember. So as long as there was no fat in it, you were kind of able to eat it. For me, it was definitely a self-soothing thing, I think, to start with. But I think what I find fascinating, and why I wish there was more research around this, is I think if you'd been able to do whatever scans or surveys or studies on me, particularly at that age and even probably now, you'd find that I have not a very good dopamine production system in my brain. I think I produce less dopamine, and I think it's dopamine, less dopamine than an average person. And I think I remember speaking to someone about it. So if I ate one biscuit, that kind of probably puts me on the kind of not even the level of dopamine like normal people would have. So I'm still below that level. So I can't go outside really. I can now because I've really trained myself to be able to go outside and really focus on the sun is shining. This makes me happy. I'm grateful for this. But really, I had to really tell myself a lot all the time of things that make me feel good, rather than it's not just an automatic thing, or it wasn't. It is more nowadays. But I think my dopamine was low. I also think I had undiagnosed ADD. And I think that you mentioned earlier, there's a correlation between food or potentially sugar and ADD. And I think all of these things were going along, as well as like slightly dysfunctional family stuff as well. So all of these multiple factors, like Emma said, it's not, I don't think it's one thing. I think we are so complex, and what leads us to addiction. For me, food was my gateway, into then cocaine and eventually crack cocaine. And it kind of, yeah, and who knows why. And I just know, but coming out of the other side, I'm just very grateful that I work in this space and I'm able to understand so much more about myself, and yeah, not have to do that anymore, really. I am really interested though I'm interested in two things. You mentioned sort of an intervention kind of to get away from sugar addiction, and you're going to look at mindfulness in your doctorate. You also mentioned you worked with neurofeedback, and I wondered if neurofeedback is helpful for this, if you know that. And I'm also interested, and I know we haven't got a huge amount of time, but I did want to just drop it into the conversation, the idea of Emma, you know the proper name for this, but things like Ozempic and those kind of other.
Oh, yeah, me too, because at the moment it's very hard to not see that as me personally, who's continually trying to get down to an optimal weight.
I'm
like
not,
the health.
I'm not interested in it about weight loss, actually, because I don't care. I'm not, for me.
No, about the physiological.
What I've heard in anecdotally is that what this does, I've got a friend who's using it, and she has said to me that she was, again, binge eater, really obsessed with food all the time. It was like food was talking to her, if she was in her kitchen or in her wherever, if she knew that she had a packet of biscuits or some crisps or some food in the fridge or whatever, it would be like it was talking to her. Since taking whatever she takes, don't actually know, she has said it has completely just removed. She doesn't even think about food, doesn't talk to her anymore. It doesn't come, like her addiction to food has been eradicated completely. She eats fine. She's never moved past the lowest dose of whatever injection she's on, because she doesn't want to, not about really, I think she lost some weight, but it's not really about losing weight for her. It's just this removal of the obsession, which I find from an addiction standpoint, not only incredible and the holy grail, but also, and from a food addiction, but also she doesn't really want to drink wine anymore. She doesn't really want to, so I'm wondering, and I've spoken to other experts in the field that we work in, especially the addiction field, about its application in alcohol addiction, in drug addiction, and in other forms of addiction, because I don't know what it does. This is what's so fascinating. I don't know what it does to the brain, but it could be revolutionary.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm not too familiar with the Ozempic kind of literature, so I can't say too much about it. But from what I've heard, is that it's really incredible in terms of it really modifies your thinking around food, and it's very interesting to see. The only concern or maybe thought that I have is, okay, if food addiction is not the underlying cause, but more like a side effect of something else, is that root cause actually going to be addressed by taking Ozempic?
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think you'd have to be prepared to. I think you should be working. I think I was talking to actually some Paul Flynn this morning, Emma, about this, and saying he prescribe it to people who come in presenting with food addiction into his sort of treatment, and he was saying, well, he'd obviously fully assess them, but actually I think he would, because at least then they'd be under case management, so they'd be dealing with the psychological issues, they'd have all of that stuff. And I think that's almost the perfect place to start it, when you're in a treatment center and you have all of those resources for psychological resources, and you can continue with therapy, because I do agree, probably just taking it, if it is for food addiction, without the kind of help, the other help. It's like nothing should be taken just as a medication. I think everything should be taken. There's always a
There you go. In the absence of that being available to the many and only to the few, what we're doing is masking at large scale underlying, and they could be health issues as well as mental issues. Like I had is polycystic ovarian syndrome a consequence of we don't know, but we've just really lost connection with understanding what drives the presentations, whether that be addiction, physical health issues. This is why I think the work is to try and say, yeah, I mean, perfect in that context where you can give someone something to help them immediately with what they're presenting with while you work on root cause analysis, great. But that's not how that drug is currently being applied. It's being applied at large by the NHS to mask a problem that is not being addressed. And the food system, I mean, what's going to happen with all these people on Ozempic is suddenly who no longer have the demand for the kind of food that they eat. But what I see in social media is people on Ozempic who eat half a McDonald's and post how amazing it is that they're full on half a hamburger and a small portion of chips. I'm not sure it's kind of healthy habits that are going to be conducive from a preventative health perspective to living longer, fuller lives. And I think, it's so appealing. I've got my heart and my head are competing for, as an individual, I can take the step back and look at this, as somebody who's kind of interested in the field, but I can also understand the pull of this magic silver bullet. But we know that silver bullets rarely exist, and a holistic 360 degree, which is where we started the conversation, Sophie, is conducive to long-term mental and physical health, not just the kind of like sticking plaster symptom presentation drug that we've come to rely so heavily on.
100%. I mean, I think like if you're in a treatment center and have all these different modalities to actually really look at what's happening and having the support, that's really ideal, because I think if you only take Ozempic as a quick fix or like the easy solution, all great, but I think long term, this is not the solution, because all these other things that you're trying to push down will come up at some point, whether it's sooner or later. So they need to be addressed anyway. And might as well do it sooner.
Yeah, I also think I have a suspicion, and you kind of confirmed that for me, Emma, with the, seeing people post online half McDonald's. I feel people who have had lifelong unhealthy eating habits aren't going to suddenly take an injection or whatever and suddenly no longer have those unhealthy eating habits. They are going to continue, they're going to reduce the amount of food they eat, but instead they're going to eat still that crap food. They're still going to eat all that processed stuff. They're not going to suddenly eat a piece of salmon and, a few asparagus as their meal. They're going to eat half of McDonald's, and it's going to cause the long-term health benefits they're trying to increase, is that there's going to be less obesity, then less heart strain, etc., but then there's going to be more of whatever else, malnutrition or whatever. I don't know, we're going to create something new now, so
nutrient deficiencies. We know that there's muscle issues. I hope that it is a big part of the jigsaw puzzle that we need to solve, because things can't continue. How metabolically unhealthy it creates, like the consequence of obesity in health is massive. So I'm certainly not discounting it, but there are no silver bullets, and it's one piece in a puzzle that we need to solve that is way more complicated than a hormone that can control appetite and how satiated somebody is. And I think of everything that I've seen online for the people that look externally incredible. Again, we're a society that's hardwired to judge, health by how somebody looks, but underlying that and looking at the food that they post, it's all highly processed food, small quantities of it, but highly processed, nutritionally insufficient food for, that's conducive to good health. I mean, that's why I'm so fascinated at the intersection of integrative medicine and trauma, mental health, and well-being, because it's in that bridge between the two, I think, that so much of the healing exists.
100%. I feel like it's also very interesting to see because, like, depending on what you eat, you feel different. Again, when we come back to the sugar, I know myself when I eat too much sugar, I'm completely anxious and can't do any work. Like, work-wise, I'm also rubbish. Like, my performance is just down the hill, whether also like gym-wise or work performance when I'm working. So yeah, it's just very interesting to see that unhealthy food might have his place in, like, if you want to enjoy it, fair enough. And I don't think like 100% restriction is fine, but there's also thinking about, okay, what foods do I put in my body and how can this help me in terms of mental clarity and performance purposes.
And I think what you said something earlier that I think is really interesting, which was like when you're eating a lot of sugar, you don't actually notice the brain fog or the anxiety. That's just your natural baseline. And I think Emma and myself, because of all of our eating issues in the past, we are extremely in touch with our bodies and the sensations what we put into our bodies, how those make us feel. And we are now luckily equipped to make those choices. If I decide to eat sugar, I'm making a conscious decision knowing that me personally, I don't get anxious or brain fog, but I get really bad inflammation in my elbows, for example. So my joints hurt. So I struggle to do much physical but it's a choice. I will then know if I'm going to go. I love food. I love going out. I love fine dining. I love eating, in really nice places. I love to drink a glass of wine, but I know that if I drink a glass of wine and I eat, rich, generally it'll be good quality ingredients, but there will be a lot of sugar, there will be a lot of fat, the fat's actually fine, but it will be all of that stuff will be in this food that I choose to eat, and I'll drink a few glasses of wine and I will wake up the next day and I will feel it. But that's a choice that I've now decided to make. What I think society is really lacking, and it comes back to the whole work that we do at Master Benson, it's this disconnect between, as you said at the beginning, the brain and the body. It's a complete disconnect. So how we feel, most people don't know how they feel in their bodies. They don't know what they're putting inside is making them feel any different at all.
And anyone with a food addiction actively disengages with their body. I mean, I'd separated my mind and my body to such an extent that when I had children, I went and asked for an elective section because I just didn't trust him. But fortunately, I had a very enlightened consultant, and we've talked about that previously on the podcast. And I did something, I had hypnobirthing, and actually having children for me was a profound reconnection with my body. But I do think that, especially in food addiction, that mind-body connection gets ruptured and there's a repair needed again, which something that just stops you from eating and controls your brain's response to that eating is not looking at how you build that positive, constructive connection between the two things so that they're working harmoniously and you're empowered and making choices, conscious, considered choices based on sound education, as opposed to, overriding a system that is designed to heal itself. So I'm really conscious.
I also think that the body scan that you're going to do, it might be, people might have listened to that and say, oh, that's quite a simple technique for this. But actually, I think it's a really important and valid one for people who have got sugar addiction, because helping them feel what's in their body, lying down and just focusing on how does my body feel at the moment, for these people who probably are really disconnected from their bodies, it will be able to hopefully reconnect them to something so that they do start to feel, okay, this is when I do this is how my body's starting to feel, and they'll kind of create that connection. So I think it's definitely a really great start.
100%. I feel like also everything around mindfulness and meditation, like this is something I really learned when I was in Asia. Like it's so powerful. Like I know for myself, like whenever I do meditation, like once a day in the morning, I feel so different. And when I skip it, I know that I'm not really that interconnected. And again, if some people don't really find meditation that's easy, there's also other tools. Like I know we briefly mentioned about neurofeedback, but neurofeedback gets you also into that meditative / flow state in a very similar way than meditation would do it. So there's also other tools that you can use to then be in touch with your body, for example, like the neurofeedback, to then regulate your emotions and your mind and body connection.
And I just love that idea of having a pathway. This is what I was so interested in researching, was understanding the root cause, the really understanding where it's come from, and then having tools that you can amass. So you have a tool, because that's how I managed to live, is amassing a toolkit. And what looked like one thing at one point, like might have been hypnotherapy, looked like a really consistent and strong yoga practice at another point, which might look like an hour and a half of walking every day at another point. And
someone said to me something really lovely, which is I read it earlier yesterday, I think, and it's someone said that any pathway, any person's healing pathway is like, it needs to be looked at as like a relay race. So you might start with EMDR, for example, and then you might have started with hypnotherapy, then you moved on to yoga, then you moved on to walking, then you moved on to whatever it is. But it's like you go from one modality, and it's not that, that modality just serves its purpose in its time at the moment in your life that you needed it. You pass on the baton and you go to the next, whatever it might be. And I love that idea that actually healing is like a relay race, and you just can use all these different things as you pass on to different therapists or different modalities or different treatments.
You need different tools at different times of your life. When you've got children, when you've got getting older, in menopause, I know I'm going to need different things at that point. But that's because I've had the privilege of being able to educate myself and equip myself in a way that's really conducive to healing. That's the bit that's needed at mass and at scale. And, and the first point of that is actually acknowledging that the addiction exists before you then go into understanding and equipping yourself with a path out of it. We ask all of our podcast guests the same question, and it's a big, lofty question, and there's no right or wrong answer, but we're just really keen to get your perspective on it. And that's that we live in a world with lots of fear and anxiety and doubt. There's lots going on at an individual level and at a macro level, geopolitical, climate change. If there was one lever for change that you could employ, that would be the catalyst, a button that you could push, a lever that you could pull, what would that be? What would be the one thing that you would want to implement that would create the change that we need to see?
I think social connection. Like, we're so disconnected, especially in the Western world, where everyone is just very individualistic. It's like, oh, I have to smash my goals, I have to do it myself, like me. And then we don't really realize who's really around us. Like the friends that we have, we don't really ask them, how are you? But how are you really? Like, what is happening in your life? Or I live in London, and I know that it's a very common thing to not know your neighbors. And I feel like it's very, very sad. Like, I'm very fortunate that I know some of my neighbors, but again, like, not everyone has that privilege to have. And that really opened my eyes when I did my work in Asia, that people are so community driven. And I love that so much. Like, people really talk to each other, they integrate you so easily. And you can see that also when we talk about mental health or healing in general, that community is such an important aspect. And when people don't have that community aspect, you can see so many, like, in a way, diseases happening, whether it's the loneliness, whether it's the depression, the anxiety, you're scared of doing X, Y, and Z, the judgment. But once you are really integrated in a healthy community aspect, whether it's family, friends, co-workers, etc., you will not only have the confidence to then do the things or for the greater good of community and yourself, but also feel better in yourself. And then the depression, the anxiety will not completely disappear, but like will be definitely lessened than, being completely isolated and trying to do everything by yourself.
Yeah, I think loneliness and isolation are like an epidemic in their own right. And if you look at all the blue zones, they have ways of being in community and in a family construct. If you look at the demise of things like eating together, ritual-based singing together, whatever you think about religion, it did hold people in community, gave them principles for living that were ritualistic, and so I think that's a beautiful answer. Thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Thank you for joining us. We wish you all the best with your doctorate. And thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Emma.